Alright guys, welcome back to G2. So today we went for a walk in the woods and we were looking for a sassafras tree. So I wanted to take a minute and go over some properties of that sassafras tree and how to identify it, and also different things we could use for elements that you might have while out in the woods here. So on our walk in the back of the property here, we actually got to kick up a couple of deer that were walking through, which was pretty cool to see them. But let's take a look at this sassafras here. So the sassafras tree, a lot of times it could be easily mistaken with other species of poplar trees. So when you look at the different leaves that are on a poplar tree here, you'll see it has this two-sided mitten here, which I think kind of looks more like a dinosaur paw print maybe. It also has a single sphere leaf, this guy here, and we'll zoom in and we'll take a closer look at it. And you can also find a single mitten leaf that's on this tree. Possibly. I know I seen one on here. Here it is. A single mitten leaf here. But I'll grab the camera, bring it in, and let you guys take a closer look at that. So here's your dinosaur paw print. Here's a smaller version of that dinosaur leaf here. And kind of a misconception, you will hear people say that it starts off as the sphere leaf, then turns into the single mitten, and then to your double mitten. But you guys could see here, here's the double mitten, and that's brand new growth, real small. And then you guys could see here, this one's got some bug chew marks on it, but there is the single mitten. So the mittens on this tree here do look very similar to that what you would find on various poplar trees. So also, if we come down and we look at the stalk here, you could see that there's fissures in the bark along the sapling here, but you can see it has that red look to it. And that's also common, that what you'll see on a sassafras tree. So these trees here, most times when I find them as a sapling, similar to this one here. And a lot of times, these trees here also, they can grow all the way up to 150 foot. So you could find these more common in that 12 to 15, 12 to 20 foot tall range. But actually here in Kentucky, in Owensboro, Kentucky, I believe is the world record tallest sassafras tree, which is currently about 100 feet tall. So the sassafras in America actually has a long history. But when the Europeaners first came to America, the Indians that were already here, they were using sassafras in various medicine forms and also as a beverage. But the Europeaners, they gathered the leaves, the bark, and the roots, and they gathered it by the tons to ship overseas back to Europe so they could use that in their medical practices at the time. So at one point here in America, the sassafras tree was really getting pretty scarce. It was very hard to find. So nowadays the sassafras has repopulated. It's not very hard to find it. You can come across it relatively easy. But the sassafras still has a lot of good properties that you could use today. So a couple of those examples would be, let's say you're out on a trekking trip, you're hiking or camping, and you got an upset stomach. You could dig that sassafras root out, just cut a chunk of it off. You can peel off the outside of that bark, put it in your mouth and chew on it as you're hiking, and that sassafras will actually ease your bellyache. Another thing you could do is you could make a tea out of it. You could take that root or the bark here, you could put that into your tea, boil it down, and you could drink that tea to help increase your own body temperature. So if you were sick and you had a fever, it'll actually increase your body temp and help you break that fever and break that infection that you have in your system. Another issue that you might have is if you ever got, maybe you fell and got bruised real deep where the bruise had that dark purple color into it. You could also take this and make that real strong tea and soak, like, let's say a bandana or something in there, make that compressed and put it on your body, and it'll help that blood to break down and pass through the body faster versus having that stagnant blood being concentrated in one area. Keep in mind, when you're identifying plants, make sure you use multiple sources on this plant. For example, the root, the smell, the leaves, the texture, the taste of it, sometimes after you identify other things. And make sure you got multiple resources to identify. So the leaves and the stalk of the trunk and the texture, the color of it. But one of the biggest identifier factors of the sassafras, minus the 3 different types of leaves, is the actual root. If you pull that root up and you scrape a little bit of it off or cut a chunk of it off and smell it, it's going to be very, very aromatic. Just the smell of that sassafras will infuse your nose. It's a very strong, lingering, very similar to root beer kind of smell. Now you could scrape the bark off a little bit and try smelling it, but I don't think that the bark has nowhere near the concentration of the smell or the benefits or taste that the root does. So really the root, I think, is the hugest or the biggest identifier of the sassafras. And also, like right now it's summertime, the trees have leaves, which makes it a lot easier to identify. But in the wintertime, when your trees don't have leaves and you're stuck to just identifying it with the trunk or the bark of the tree, that root's going to make a huge difference on helping you with identification of it. So nowadays, the sassafras, it's not a very popular resource for treating different medical ailments that you might have. So in about the 1960s, the government came in, they did some testing on the sassafras with animals and whatnot, and it come to find out that the sassafras was actually carcinogenic. So when they have the sassafras tree, you can go through different processes to extrude the oil out of the tree. The oil that they extract is actually safrole. So the safrole is a super, super high concentration of the sassafras. So the oil that they're extracting out of the sassafras tree is actually what was causing the cancer. And I think it was also causing liver damage in animals also. But keep in mind, that's in very high concentrations though. It's not the same thing as making a brew of tea or some root beer. It was very, very large, high condensed concentration amounts that these animals were ingesting. So in order to make, let's say, root beer, and you wanted to replace your sassafras with something else, you could use aniseed oil, and then maybe gumbo dishes and different recipes, you could use the aniseed instead. And also you could use sarsaparilla instead of using the aniseed root in order to make your root beer. So fortunately for us, our government solves all our problems. So they had basically a team of scientists and food experts and FDA and all these things came together. So instead of using the sassafras root, which is natural and you could gather out of the woods behind your house, they've now created different chemicals that you can ingest in replace of that root beer for artificial flavorings for your drink that you consume nowadays. On the plus side. So another idea for you guys is it's summertime right now, so if you go out scouting or trekking, whatever you're doing out in the woods, if you take some time to find some of your local sassafras and identify it now while it has the leaves on there, and then either mark it with some marking tape or put a rock by it, some way to identify where this tree is at, and then come back in the wintertime. And after the leaves are gone and fallen, you can look at that tree to help you identify it in the winter when the leaves aren't on it. Because the leaves are going to be the easiest thing that you can use to identify it the fastest. But when the wintertime comes around and the leaves are gone and you're trying to find your sassafras, you might have a pretty difficult time identifying it without these leaves on there. So my goal here is I want to make a 3-part series. So I'm going to have the first video being some of the basic things that you could do with the sassafras, and how to identify it, and that's what we covered today. In parts 2 and part 3, I'd like to come in and make a very basic sassafras tea, which is basically just going to be the root, sugar, and water. And that's it. Let it cool down, have your tea. Unless you want to consume it hot, you could do that too. And then in part 3, I want to make a little bit more complex drink out of that sassafras. And we're just going to add some more ingredients to it and kind of thicken it up a little bit. Almost more closer to like a syrup or a soda, minus the carbonation in it. Alright guys, well I appreciate you coming on my walk today out in the woods and finding this sassafras tree. And we'll catch you next time.